So imagine yourself arriving to a new city and you want to go to a specific shop one of your friends recommended. Now imagine that you lost your phone and you have to rely on a map to get around. You feel very confident about your orientation skills and you immediately start walking towards the shop. Fast forward a couple hours and you are totally lost. You finally ask a local to point out in the map where the shop is, and it turns out that you have the wrong map. The story shows that the world is not always as it seems. The map represents a worldview, what we perceive as being true based on our beliefs and upbringing. And the shop is the world, independent of our personal opinions. Taking a more up-to-date example, the map is just like a virtual reality headset, projecting a simulation of the real world. If you grow up using this headset, you might not even realize that you are wearing it in the first place. If we are constantly looking at the world through these maps or screens, how can I even begin to try to change them? Can I even change them? I really do believe that we can change these maps. I mean, the idea of self-development is exactly built on that belief. To begin understanding how to change these maps, first we need to dig deeper into the topic. Unfortunately, someone already dedicated many years studying how these changes come to happen. And although in a completely different context, I believe his work holds valuable lessons. I'm referring to Thomas Kuhn, an American physicist, historian, and philosopher of science, who wrote back in 1962 a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he analyzed how natural sciences evolved during the age. He uses the word paradigm to describe the scientific achievements that for a time provide a model of the natural world. Now you might have heard paradigm, or even better, paradigm shift, in a completely different context. Today the word simply means a reference or a standard of a certain subject. From the vagueness associated with the concept, paradigm today is considered a buzzword, an important sounding word often used with little meaning, used to impress laymen. And for this exact same reason, let's look with a pair of fresh eyes to the concept of paradigm proposed by Kuhn, which I think it holds very important lessons when it comes to a personal development journey. So you will think that science advances through cumulative growth, so more and more knowledge is collected and the field of studies progressively gets more answers to the current questions. Well, Kuhn believes exactly the opposite. For him, science advances are not rational and linear, but instead advances in a cycle, fueled by paradigms battling with each other. Kuhn realized the importance of social and psychological aspects in the scientific community. After all, science is still performed by humans. He sees the paradigms as a collection of scientific achievements that influence how science advances. Because students learn about the field constrained by this way of looking at the world, it's difficult for them to see things in a different way. I'm sure you saw this optical illusion before, right? You can see either a duck or a rabbit, nothing new here, but Kuhn used this exact same illusion to explain the concept of a paradigm. If you are conditioned in seeing only the rabbit and someone comes and looks at the exact same picture and sees the duck,
No, God!
well, you will defend your point of view, right? And will not stop until the other person sees what you see. How scientists look at the natural world works in the exact same way. The current model is accepted until a new one comes and challenges the status quo. This cycle was divided by Kuhn into two major scientific periods: normal science and extraordinary science. To better illustrate this cycle, let's go back to 1543, a time where everyone who looked at the sky will tell you that all the stars, planets, moon and sun all orbit around our planet, which is, by the way, the center of the universe. During this time, the geocentric model of the universe proposed by Nicholas Ptolemy back in the year 200 was still widely accepted by the scientific community. Now this may sound plain foolish to us now, but try to imagine growing up with this idea, which is, by the way, been accepted and practiced for almost 1400 years. Kuhn calls this normal science, a period during which scientists of a field accept the current model and base their entire models, calculations and measurements around the paradigm without even questioning it. But it was quite complex. I like the quote from a king back in the 13th century that proclaimed that if God had consulted him while creating the universe, he would have received better advice.
Bring me his head.
This complexity eventually led people to believe that this model wasn't right, and more astronomers were looking for alternatives. And here is where Nicolaus Copernicus enters. By presenting a new model of the universe with the sun in the middle, the method to predict the movement of the planets became super simple and as accurate. Because of that, this new model sparked a crisis, dividing opinions among the scientific community. For Kuhn, this marks the transition from normal to extraordinary science, where two competing paradigms fight for the approval of the community, where only one can win. And that's what happened for more than 100 years. The church was the biggest opposition because it meant that Earth and the humans weren't in the center of it all. Gradually, more technology advances, like the Galileo telescope, provided better observation and proof to support this new theory. Eventually, Kepler and Newton, influenced by the heliocentric model, developed the equations that we today use, but over 100 years of change. It's quite interesting to note that almost all major scientific revolutions met this resistance. And I think it's even more interesting that the scientists themselves would acknowledge this difficulty to convince others. Here's a funny quote by Max Planck: "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it." As time passes, eventually the period of extraordinary science fades and the prevailing paradigm carries on, beginning a new cycle and a new period of normal science. And although Kuhn's analysis was only aimed for paradigm shifts in scientific history, I think you can start drawing some similarities for your own experience in life. What behaviors or thoughts do you have that are based on assumptions? The media, ignorant opinions, and made-up facts can shape your thoughts without your conscious permission. And I know it can be hard to kickstart this cycle of improvement, just like it was hard to view the sky in a different way. But thanks to Kuhn's work, I believe there's some valuable lessons that can be implemented in our life to kickstart this cycle. First, diverse your experiences. Unlike science, there is no empirical evidence in social or personal interactions. Therefore, we must be responsible for providing ourselves with different points of view and be able to learn from them. Regardless of their validity, new opinions make us question our current thought pattern. Second, pay attention to the anomalies. Paradigms that don't correctly reflect reality tend to perform poorly against observation. It's just like when you have a preconceived idea about a certain person and when you finally meet them, you realize that you were totally wrong. Or when you don't like a job, or when your partner is getting more and more annoying. The anomalies indicate that something has to change. Third, don't get attached to an opinion. Just because you have been doing things a certain way for years doesn't mean you are doing it right. The world changes and we have to change with it. Remember Max Planck's words: either adapt or be left behind. And fourth, don't expect others to change. The resistance to change was predicted by many theorists, with all of them concluding that time is the best agent of change. Personal change and growth is an extremely personal process. If you're trying to change someone you deeply care about, be a source of inspiration and very, very patient. I believe that understanding these concepts is to change ourselves and respect others. Kuhn's work gives us the bird's eye view of the major paradigm shifts from the past, entrusting us with a new point of view to face our future. The world is a complicated place with many different maps. The biggest lesson is don't romanticize about the one you're reading right now. Be able to read others, and eventually you will be able to find the place you're looking for.